Today we're going to be talking about writing algebraic expressions and numerical expressions. So go ahead, you can open up to the next available page in your notebook and put today's date at the top. And this is topic 3, lesson 4. Write algebraic expressions. So before we get into algebraic expressions, we're going to write down some definitions, and the first one is a numerical expression. Okay, so the first thing we want to think about is the word expression. When we have an expression, it's very similar to an equation, except there's no equal sign. Remember, an expression just has numbers, it can have constants, it can have variables, it can have operations like addition and subtraction, but there is no equal sign. Whereas with an equation, we have two things that are shown to be equal. When we say numerical expression, we're talking about an expression that only has numbers and operations. It will not have any variables. So we can say that it is a math phrase that contains numbers and operations. And remember, operations are things like add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So we have numerical expressions, and then we also have something called an algebraic expression. So an algebraic expression is really similar to a numerical expression. The difference is you can include variables, and we're going to talk about what a variable is in a minute as well. But it's basically a math expression that has at least one variable and at least one operation. So it's really the same idea as a numerical expression. The difference is you can have variables. So for example, if I were to write a numerical expression, that could be something like 10 divided by 5 plus 7. That would be a numerical expression. Whereas an algebraic expression is going to have at least one variable. So that might be something like 2x minus 5. So in both of these we have operations, but in an algebraic expression we also have variables. And so I've kind of been talking about the word variable loosely here, but I want to make sure we jot down what a variable actually is. And a variable, it's basically just a letter or symbol that represents some unknown quantity. And usually we use a lowercase letter for this. So we can say it's a letter or symbol that represents an unknown quantity. Okay, and when we're writing our expressions with variables, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. However, I do want to show different ways you can write multiplication, because that's one where there's quite a few different ways to write it. So for example, if we're going to multiply 4 times the variable n, I could write this as 4 times n. Now, the one issue with that is that can get kind of confusing when you use the x for multiplication, because x is also a variable. So, because of that, we could write it as 4 multiplied by n with the dot. We can also write 4 and then in parentheses n to show that we're multiplying them. We can also use the asterisk. And then finally, we can write it just right next to each other. Anytime you have a number right behind a variable or right next to a variable, it's assumed that's multiplication. This is like me saying I have 4 groups of n. So all of these mean 4 multiplied by n. So the last thing we're going to look at are the different parts of an expression. So go ahead, you can label this parts of an expression. So there's 3 things we're going to go over in terms of the parts of an expression. The first part is called a term. So each part of an expression that is separated by either an addition or subtraction sign, those are all considered terms. So we're going to go ahead and write down our 3 definitions, and then we're going to look at an example to kind of help us identify what they are. So for term, you can say each part of an expression that is separated by an addition or subtraction sign. And it has to be addition or subtraction. So that's one part of an expression. The second part of an expression is called the coefficient. So a coefficient is the number that is being multiplied by a variable. So for example, like in this one here where we wrote 4 times n, 4 would be considered a coefficient because it's being multiplied by a variable. So we can say it is the number, and it's important to note that it's the number, not the variable. So the number that is multiplied by the variable. Okay, so we've got the term, the coefficient, and then lastly, we have what's called a constant. And if you think of the word constant, I think of something that stays the same, it doesn't change. And so when we're talking about constants, we are talking about a numerical value. It's basically the number that, or a number that's in an expression that isn't going to change. Whereas like a variable, the value of your variable can change. Well, with a constant, it stays the same. So we are going to go ahead and take a look at an example here. And remember, you can always pause the video if anything's going too fast. So if we have the expression 12r plus 1/2 r minus 19. We are going to identify any terms, coefficients, and constants. So let's start with terms. So remember, the terms are parts of the expression that are separated by either addition or subtraction signs. So if I take a look here, I see I have 12r and then I have an addition sign. So 12r would be my first term. Then I see I have 1/2 r, and then I have a subtraction sign. So 1/2 r would be my second term. And then finally, after the subtraction sign, I have the number 19, and that would be my final term. So this expression has 3 terms in it. Okay, now let's look for coefficients. So remember, the coefficient is the number that's multiplied by the variable. So if I take a look here, I see in 2 spots we have a variable, and over here 12 is being multiplied by the variable, and over here 1/2 is multiplied by the variable. So there are 2 coefficients. One is 12 and the other is 1/2, because this is 12 times r and 1/2 times r. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to look for any constants. So remember, a constant is just a numerical value. That means it's just a number, there's nothing else attached to it. And if I take a look here, the only spot where we have a number without a variable is at the end here, 19. 19 is just the number 19. It's not going to change. It is constant. And so 19 is our only constant. Okay, so today was basically just kind of going over a lot of vocabulary words. We're going to use this to help us write both numerical and algebraic expressions in the future.